Welcome to another Sunday evening conversation, community talk. It's Chris Lewit here, head coach of Tennis Evolution. And if you watch the Prodigy Maker or listen to the Prodigy Maker tennis show, which is my podcast, welcome. I know we also have my podcast audience who watches on Sunday. And this show on Sunday will become one of the podcasts as well. So it serves a dual purpose. It's a community talk and Q&A where we can discuss anything that you guys want from my channel, Chris Lewit, at Chris Lewit YouTube channel, and Tennis Evolution, of course. So I'm happy to talk with you guys about technique. The subject tonight is the technique of Carlos Alcaraz, who you may be familiar with. Not a bad player. The well-known Spanish player, currently #1 in the world, 7 Grand Slam titles, I believe, and counting. It's pretty good. And last week we had a good talk about Spanish tennis and the roots of the Spanish method, and the system that they use in Spain. And we've been posting a lot of videos about the Spanish method and how Carlos Alcaraz, how his game was built the Spanish way. And he has a very interesting game when you look at it through the lens of Spanish tennis and the Spanish methodology. So we can talk about that. I'd like to talk about some of his technique in particular. If you guys have any questions about his technique, I think he has some interesting aspects of his technique. And also he's changed his technique over time. If you look at his game, especially over the last few years, you see some adjustments in his backhand stroke, the technique, where he started to bring his hands down lower like Sinner, make it a little more compact. But he has an ultra compact ATP style two-handed backhand. It has a real sharp hook loop. The racket doesn't swing around his body. So he has a very compact, super modern ATP two-handed backhand, which I think is cool, and it's a very good model for players to copy if you can do it. And on the forehand side, has a very interesting forehand. I think his grip is interesting because it's a very conservative grip. Sometimes I look at it, it looks Eastern, and then lately it looks like it's a little more semi-Western. So I think he may have even shaded it over more to semi. But it's pretty conservative. He's definitely on the conservative side of semi versus some other pros like Rafa and Djokovic, who are more almost towards the bevel 5, bevel 4.5, bevel 4.5 or 5. Alcaraz is really closer to bevel 3. I could have sworn he was Eastern for a while. I asked his coaching team in Spain because I visit the Juan Carlos Ferrero Academy relatively frequently. I've been there a few times in the last I was there just 2 years ago for a week visiting, and I actually watched Alcaraz practice all week there in Spain, in Vienna, which is the little town in Spain where he trained for so many years with Juan Carlos Ferrero. So I was actually there just a couple of years ago, and I got to watch him practice every day leading up into Wimbledon. It was really cool, and I got to look at his game up close. I interviewed the whole team there, including with Antonio Cascales, who is the legend there, who was actually Juan Carlos Ferrero's coach. So I spent a lot of time in Spain. I spent more time in Barcelona, but Vienna, where Alcaraz trained, is down about 4-hour drive from Barcelona in Alicante. And it's in this little village, small town, and the academy's in the middle of nowhere, like in the farmlands. And Juan Carlos Ferrero has his private house there and just a bunch of tennis courts and a gym, and it's an incredible place, for serious training. And Carlos started there when he was young, and Juan Carlos Ferrero saw that he had a lot of talent, and they built the #1 player in the world there out of this really, it's not a big academy basically out in the fields, out in the farmland there. It's just unbelievable story. And if you know anything about that academy, the Juan Carlos Ferrero Academy, it used to be called Equilite, and now it's just called the Ferrero Tennis Academy. And for many years it was called Equilite. And they started with 2 little courts and like a building. It's an incredible story if you learn about the history of that academy. And Antonio Cascales, I call him the other Tony in my book. Guys, The Secrets of Spanish Tennis is the book I'm referring to, which is the book I wrote on the Spanish method. It's in its 2nd edition. First edition was over 10 years ago, so there's been a lot of 20 years of research going into that book. Now the 2nd edition just came out last year. And the other Tony, Antonio Cascales, is really a true legend of Spanish tennis. I mean, he's an incredible coach. He's one of the godfathers of Spanish tennis, and pretty much very few people have heard of him. You may have heard of Samuel Lopez, who's now traveling with Juan Carlos Ferrero. He's a very good coach, and he's been a stalwart there for decades. I think he's been coaching with Juan Carlos Ferrero and the whole team there. And Antonio Cascales, that legendary coach that I talked about, he has a really interesting teaching philosophy. He's very open-minded. And I think part of the reason you see a player like Carlos Alcaraz with the variety that he has, and how they let him attack and use the drop shot and go to the net and play all-court game. I think that's very much like the philosophy of Cascales, is like to be flexible with the player, to give them parameters to work within. I think it's really interesting how that academy developed Carlos's game with a very open mind. You know, they gave him a lot of freedom. They gave him a lot of autonomy to develop his own style. I think that's really what I'm trying to get at there. And so you see this Spanish player who doesn't play like a typical Spanish player. He has the elements of the classic Spanish players, but he's just taken it to the next level with a lot more shot making, and to be honest, a lot more aggression and a little less patience. So we could talk about that as well. Getting back to Alcaraz's technique, I think he has a pretty good serve. Do you guys want to talk about how his serve has changed over the last year? That's been a big talk, how he's adjusted his serve technique. If you want to know my opinion about it, I think it's more of a personal thing. I don't think everyone should rush out to copy the Cobra serve. This is a really interesting debate in biomechanics right now, whether that Cobra style where you relax the wrist at the beginning of the motion and you point the elbow or the tip of the racket down, if that adds to your serve, if that adds to your acceleration, if that makes a difference in racket speed. I think the jury's still out. I don't think there's any science to prove one way or the other that it's better. And the fact that he's doing that, to me, doesn't mean that much. It's just a personal thing that feels comfortable for him. Obviously, his team wanted to try that, and he likes that. But, you know, you see iterations of serve technique and technique changes all the time with, and it happens now a lot with pro players. I think we should be careful to assume that it's making a big difference. You don't know that. It could be psychological. A lot of the changes that pros make, I'm not so sure you can prove that they have a quantitatively big impact on like their NPH or something like that, or their accuracy. That you could look at the stats to try to determine that. You can try to make that case, but I think a lot of the changes that pros make are psychological rather than biomechanical. But in this case, what he does with his serve technique, he points the racket down in the beginning, a lot like Djokovic. And a lot of, you'll see like on YouTube and on socials, a lot of people will make a big deal about it and say it's doing this, it's doing that. You see a lot of, I think, questionable analysis of his serve technique and biomechanics. But to me, I thought his old serve was actually pretty solid, good technique. It's a little more classic. It didn't have that Cobra style. Maybe his wrist was a little more locked, and maybe they wanted to free up his wrist, and they felt that helped him accelerate a little bit. But you know, it's hard to prove that can make a quantitatively measurable difference. That's very difficult to prove. We can talk about his footwork. You know, we can talk about the way he moves on the court. We just posted a video about how he moves and how his footwork is trained in Spain. If you have any questions about that on Tennis Evolution, we have a very good video on Carlos Alcaraz's footwork and movement and how he was developed the Spanish way and how to move, which I think is very interesting. You know, footwork's probably one of the most famous things they do in Spain. They work beautifully on the technique there. So if you have any questions about that, if you want to post a comment or question, let me know. Otherwise, I'll just riff on some of those areas that interest me. Getting back to my last visit to the Ferrero Tennis Academy, Juan Carlos Ferrero's Academy in Spain. So Alcaraz was there training for Wimbledon. I got to watch him practice every day. I interviewed Antonio Cascales, who I think is one of the geniuses of Spanish tennis that probably you guys have never heard of, and most people have never heard of him. Most people know who maybe Tony Nadal is. Most people have heard of maybe Luis Bruguera and Pato Alvarez. Some people don't even know who those guys are. But Luis Bruguera and Pato Alvarez were the absolute godfathers of Spanish tennis back in the 70s and 80s. And this guy, Antonio Cascales, is really up there with them, I think, because he developed two #1 players, Alcaraz and Juan Carlos, out of this little 2-court facility in the farmlands in a small town, basically in the middle of nowhere in Spain. There's not much going on there. Maybe an hour from Alicante, which is a larger city in Spain. And it's unbelievable story. Imagine, it's like every coach's dream. I'm a high performance coach, and I haven't trained any #1 players in the world yet. And everyone dreams of that, having maybe a player who could be a pro. I've coached players who are playing on the circuit, but to have two #1 players coming out of your shop, out of your academy is, I think, extremely impressive. So that academy is a real gem. It's a real special place. And for elite training, they do a very good job with their elite pro team. So it's a very interesting story there. The history of that academy is very, it's fascinating. How they built from 2 courts to what they are now, which is not a huge academy, kind of a medium-sized academy. And Juan Carlos has his house right there. All the coaches, Juan Carlos lives there in his private house, so it's like his private estate with tennis courts around it. Very, very unique setup. Very different place to train. And obviously, Carlos loved being there for many, many years, and they had a great relationship. We could talk about the breakup of Juan Carlos Ferrero and Alcaraz too. That's been a hot topic in the news as well. Personally, I think if there are any coaches listening or watching, and we've all had these experiences. I've had it many, many times where we had these amazing relationships with players, and then things change. The player changes, the relationship changes. Sometimes money and finances come into play. I'm sure that had something to do with it. I'm sure one of the red flags to me was when Alcaraz started building out his own academy, not far from the Ferrero Tennis Academy. And to me, I felt like that was the beginning of the end, because obviously he's not going to want to train at Ferrero Tennis Academy anymore if he's building his own brand and his own academy. So from my point of view, that was a big factor. It had to be part of the clash, the disconnect, because when one of there's an immediate kind of business and financial problem there, because for many years he represented Ferrero Tennis Academy, brought them a lot of business, and then I don't know if you're familiar with the Alcaraz has started his own academy called the Carlos Alcaraz Academy, and there's just bound to be friction there. Just from that alone, just from a business perspective, having a competing academy, and how do you work out the technical details of that in the contract? It's just kind of awkward. And to me, that probably was a big factor in the friction there, among other things that I'm not privy to. We have our first question, guys. Carlos is improving much faster without Ferrero. and you want to go to the Carlos Alcaraz Academy, I'm sure. I mean, I'm sure he's going to do very well with that academy. I think that's debatable whether he's I mean, he's obviously doing very well, but I think let's see the whole year, and we'll see how he does for the whole year without Juan Carlos Ferrero. I think for all of us coaches out there, we like to think that we are really important and we make a big difference in the players' development. And of course, coaches do play a major role. But we'll see if he sort of stumbles this year, you know, over the course of the entire year. And if there was some support that Juan Carlos was giving him that he may miss, you know. So far, so good because he won the Australian. And but I think probably, I mean, Samuel Lopez is a very good coach, but Samuel Lopez has always been sort of a journeyman coach and an understudy coach from from the Ferrero Tennis Academy. I mean, I'm sure he's excellent, but certainly doesn't bring the star power that Juan Carlos Ferrero does as a former #1 player in the world. So we have a few more comments here. Thanks for sharing. And I don't quite understand your comment because you say Bruce Kovacs, but do you mean Mark Kovacs, the serve expert? Or let me know who you mean, who's been working on Alcaraz's serve. I didn't know that he hired a serve expert, but that sounds interesting, a specialist on the serve. So in terms of his technique, let's start with, did you say Mark Kovacs is working on Carlos Alcaraz's serve? I was not aware of that. I was not aware of that. Let's talk about one technical aspect at a time. Like let's start with, I mentioned the backhand. So Alcaraz has a very, I think, underrated two-handed backhand. One thing that you guys can learn and take away from his backhand is how well he does on moving wide and using semi-open stance. And this is something I work on with so many players, and I would definitely recommend, you know, you got to know like what could you actually take away and learn from Alcaraz rather than just talk about technique. That to me is the biggest one. If you notice when Alcaraz moves wide, it's basically like he's hitting a left-handed forehand. He's so good, so strong in the legs, very strong in the hips, and he can basically hit an open stance or semi-open backhand as if it's like a lefty forehand. And Nadal, if you remember, Nadal also did that very well as a lefty. His backhand was incredible. And having that flexibility, that adaptability to be able to go to the open stance or semi-open stance on your backhand side, I think is really critical in today's game. So if you're a competitive player or you're trying to, you know, get your backhand to the next level, even if you have a one-hander, but particularly if you have a two-hander, I work on that all the time with my students here. And most people, when they try to do, like if you see what Alcaraz does when he steps out onto his left leg, most people who try that, they immediately say, that feels really uncomfortable. You know, how do I get any power? It doesn't feel right when I load. I can't get any depth on my shots. That's typically what students say, and you have to work on it. And when you see him do that at the pro level, live, moving out wide, you know, sliding into the left leg, it's really, really special. And you see all the top players do that now. Sinner does that very well. Djokovic does that very well. All the top guys. To me, that's one of the #1 important items if you're developing your backhand, especially if you have a two-handed backhand, is learn how to hit it like a forehand with a semi-open stance or with open stances, and learn how to stretch and slide and get out in the corners with that left leg if you're a righty. And so that's for you guys out there, I would say that's a huge takeaway from Alcaraz is that. And if you're able to do, depending on your level, the way he's compact and he has that hook loop. Hook loop is like the racket stays very much on the chest side, on the left side of his body. The racket doesn't scoop around, doesn't swoop around his body like some of the less compact backhands out there. It's an ultra compact backhand. And that style, to me, is the best style you can develop. Very super compact, and he's got that beautiful straight arm extension with the left arm. Most of the top pro men do that. A lot of the women are doing that too now. Yeah, so thanks for sharing. Shortening the backhand like that. That is also, if you try that, and I've tried that with many of my students, most people will say, I can't get any power. I can't accelerate, because most people are too stiff, and they don't relax their wrists enough, and they don't get a good lag, and they don't use their legs and hips. They don't have the genetics that Alcaraz has. He has a lot of fast twitch fibers, right? But the main thing is, those to me are the two takeaways that make his backhand really special. The super compact style that you see a lot of top guys doing now, but not every pro is like that. Like if you even look at Djokovic and Sinner, and sometimes their backhands, the racket wraps a little more around the back of the, more towards like 6 p.m. if there's a clock. The racket comes a little more of a looping style, versus Alcaraz style is ultra compact. I call it a hook loop. Dr. Brian Gordon, the biomechanist, calls it a hook loop, which I like that saying, hook loop. So those to me are the two takeaways on the back end. You get that, if you can learn that ultra compact and then get that straight arm extension, really, really special. And this is kind of like the wish list, and then the open stance and semi-open stance. Those are really good takeaways for the backhand. Any question about the fast twitch? Well, fast twitch is genetic, so it's hard to replicate that. And that's why a lot of people try to do that backhand and they're not able to do it. But on the wish list, those are the two things I think are way up on the list. How about the forehand? So the forehand, like I said, is a very pretty conservative grip for modern times. The forehand, one of the things that he does that's interesting is the way he takes both arms back on the preparation. A lot of people talk about this on social media. Other players do this too. Sabalenka does this, and a lot of pros are copying that style. But to me, it's not that big a deal. Like, you can take the racket back a lot of different ways. And just because that's his style, I don't think we should all rush out to copy that. Just like, just like his serve. Like, I'm not sure we should all rush out to learn the Cobra serve either. And with the forehand, so he takes both arms back and he brings his left arm really far back behind him. In fact, I think for most people, A, they may not have the range of motion to do that, and B, that can put the left arm in kind of a precarious position, kind of an awkward place, Yeah, everyone's copying. We have a comment that the comment is, I just copied Alcaraz's Cobra style, but I think everyone, it's natural, people want to try it, but I think you should do what's right for you and not what's right for him. Just because a pro does something doesn't mean we should all go out and copy it right away. That may not be the best thing. For me, I'm looking for sort of the universal things that will pay off, the real takeaways that are biomechanically sound and maybe scientifically provable that will help you, rather than some player's idiosyncrasy or style. You should be careful copying style, and you should try to copy more fundamental biomechanical elements, if that makes sense. So on the forehand, I'm not sure you should copy that style, the way he takes it back. You can coil your trunk, you can coil your shoulders and load your hips without taking the left arm way back behind you on the take back, if you know what I'm saying. I don't think that's a huge takeaway that everyone should copy, because you can separate the arms. A lot of pros separate the arms on the take back. A lot of pros, like, his hands are a little bit high. The racket's probably higher than I would want for a lot of players. what's interesting, I was watching Andy Roddick's forehand technique, and he kind of does it similarly. He takes it back very high and takes both arms back together. That's just a particular style. You don't need to copy that to make your forehand great. But what would you copy with Alcaraz? Well, definitely the way he has a multitude of stances, like we were saying, the open stances, closed stances, neutral stances, being able to move laterally with a good open stance in the same way that you need that on the backhand side. That's something you can definitely take away and work on your forehand side. You should be able to, you know, slide and move into the right leg with strength and stability. And that's something very important you can take away from the forehand. Another thing that a lot of people like to copy, I'll have a lot of my students copying his you know, helicopter follow through, and that type of follow through is becoming really popular on tour. So just from a technique perspective, I think it's fascinating how he's using that like 50% of the time or more, where he's taking a swing and he's actually not following through. Well, initially he's following through to the left side, and then he's wrapping around his head like a lasso. Sometimes I call it the lasso. He's kind of like swinging a lasso around his head, and then he'll finish back on the same side. So he's actually finishing his swing around his head and then coming out on the right side. And a lot of players are doing this now. A lot of players are copying this style. And I think this could be a technical change that transforms the way we understand the forehand, because this never happened writ large before. Yeah, there were maybe a few players who tried it, but it really started to become common with Nadal. And Nadal used to do the same style of swing. He would accelerate so much that instead of stopping the racket, he would just let the racket continue around his head like a lasso, like a helicopter type swing, follow through. And to me, this is the most interesting biomechanical thing happening on the tour, because it's everywhere now, and players are using that. It's not that it never happened before, but it's the percentage of forehands that are using that type of follow through now it's getting higher and higher. Women are doing it, men are doing it, not just Alcaraz. And so I think that this is a very interesting trend on the tour to watch. I've been watching it very carefully. You know, I'm a technician. I work on technique with my students. I like to build the technique. And I'm studying biomechanics in school. So this is an area that I'm really interested in. And, you know, people like to debate, like, why is he doing that? Why are players doing that? They got to be doing it for a reason. It has to help them. So is it giving them a little more spin, like they're swinging a little more vertically? Is it helping them? They tend to do that swing, especially when they're trying to spin the ball or handle high balls. A really interesting question, like why are pros doing it? And how did this become so common, even just in the last 10 or 15 or 20 years? Because it's a pretty major technical evolution. You know, this is the Tennis Evolution YouTube channel that we run, but this is a major evolution in technique, what Carlos does with the forehand. And because he's so dynamic and popular, everybody's watching him and copying him do that, you know? There's a question about the palm opening up. That is a great technical question. There are many players who open their palms slightly, and it's actually not a big deal. If you're interested in this topic, I enjoy this discussion, but the idea of the waiter's tray and the palm up, a lot of pros do that, but then they close it during the next part of the swing. So it's actually not a flaw. Like you take Sampras, you mentioned Sampras. Having the palm up, a lot of people like to diagnose that as a problem, but it's not really a problem if the player supinates. When they drop the racket, they supinate, and then they swing up from a supinated position. What palm up basically means is you're pronating during the racket drop. So players will turn their forearm into pronation, which if you keep it like that and then you swing up and forward, you're going to lose power. You're going to lose acceleration. But obviously, a guy like Sampras did not lose acceleration, had one of the best serves in the world. And many other players, if you look at them, especially pros, they'll drop their racket with the palm slightly up, but then they'll close. They're going to turn they're going to re-rotate their forearm into supination, and then when they come up supinated, it's just like the palm up never happened. So that, to me, nobody talks about that. If you go down palm up, but then you fix it, and then you come up like with the normal, if you come up normally like you are on edge, it's not going to affect your racket speed. It's not going to affect your serve negatively. So where do you see palm up that's a problem? If a junior or a rec player, recreational player, if they take the racket down palm up and they keep the wrist, the forearm pronated, and a lot of club players will just go palm up and serve and then hit the ball with the palm in the same position. That's going to kill your racket speed. So that's why it's become something that's usually diagnosed as a problem. But what a lot of people don't realize is if you rotate your forearm back to supination, it's like the palm up never happened. And that's what a lot of pros do. If you remember, like a Leighton Hewitt was a famous player, was quite palm up when he dropped the racket. And off the top of my head, I can't name 5 or 10 who do, but I know for sure there are pros, like you mentioned, that were slightly palm up. And there are coaches like Steve Smith, the famous American coach, and other coaches from the Great Base coaching philosophy, and they diagnose palm up all the time. Palm up is one of the big things that they work on, if you're familiar with Great Base and Steve Smith. But they never mention that if you go from palm up to supinated, it doesn't matter. It doesn't affect the serve negatively. So it's almost like that would be a better correction for some players who are just naturally a little palm up. As long as they supinate and they come up on edge, it's going to be fine. But obviously, if you're palm up and you stay in that pronated, palm up basically means you pronated early. So you're palm up, you're pronating. And if you pronate early, you're going to lose a lot of racket speed, basically. So, interesting comment. Thanks for sharing that. Thank you for the highs. We've got a few highs there. Thank you, guys. I appreciate that. And we're trying to build this Sunday evening community on Tennis Evolution. And of course, all of my subscribers and followers on my channel are welcome to join us here, of course. So this lasso helicopter follow through, I think this is the most interesting trend in pro tennis, just from a biomechanical, technical, if you like to geek out on technique like I do, this is the most interesting thing because the prevalence of it is remarkable. It's happening so frequently. And, is this the future of the forehand? Like, 20 years from now, or is everyone just going to be following through around, and then people will say like, oh yeah, people used to follow through and stop their racket on the left side of the body. I don't know, but I'm not shocked that it's happening. I'm shocked at how frequently pros are using that type of follow through in regular rallies. It used to be something like maybe you'd reverse, maybe you'd come up vertically when you're late or when you're in trouble, right? But now this is like a standard wraparound follow through that you see very, very frequently with a lot of guys. For example, I like Djokovic a lot. Djokovic didn't really used to do that much, And now even for Djokovic in his later stages of his career, you see him starting to do it a little. He doesn't do it that much, not nearly as much as Alcaraz, with the helicopter and the lasso. And so some players tend to do that a lot more than others. Why is that? It's a great question. A very interesting technical question. Do you think the players are getting a little more topspin when they do that? I think they're getting maybe a little more vertical swing path. They get a little better shape on the ball. You see players do that when they get a ball coming in that's a little high and outside. They tend to do that wraparound finish. I do that sometimes when I'm pulled out wide. But, especially like for me myself as a player, I was never taught to do that so much, like Nadal first started this. And when Nadal started doing this, he freaked Tony Nadal out. He freaked his coach out. Uncle Tony was like, what are you doing? Nadal, he said, you got to stop doing that. Tony's more of a traditionalist. And Nadal's like, I don't know, it feels good. It feels free. I like it. I don't have to stop my racket. It gives me a nice it feels comfortable. If you try it, it does feel kind of comfortable. You don't have to stop. You just get to sort of let the speed of the racket die out. You have like a longer path to decelerate. I think that just for comfort, the players are swinging so fast that this may be a very comfortable way for top guys to follow through now, because rather than just stopping the racket, they're swinging so darn fast that they just want to let the racket have a longer pathway to decelerate. That's one of my hypotheses. I don't think it increases the hitting zone. That's a great, I mean, I know what you're saying, but I don't think it increases, I don't think there's any way you could, I don't see any possible way that could be true, because you can extend through the hitting zone all the way out and still follow through to the normal way. You know, so the hitting zone is only limited by, well, it's limited by physics. The ball can't stay on the strings very long. And in terms of the actual pathway of the racket, your arm's going to extend through, you know, what we call the hitting zone. The ball's gone, but the racket will keep going until you reach the max limit of where your shoulder, basically shoulder mobility, and then you got to follow through. And you can follow through up and around. You can follow through to the shoulder. You can follow through with more of a windshield wiper. You know, there's a lot of different ways you can follow through. Right, so we have a very interesting comment about how Carlos finishes with his palm down rather than palm face out. And so that's something that I've noticed. And before Carlos Alcaraz came on the scene, a lot of top coaches, a lot of commentators and coaches said you need to finish the forehand palm out. And basically what that means is as you're rotating the forearm, you need to finish pronated. So we're getting back to pronation and supination. At the end of the swing, the palm should be facing out. And that was taught, and probably still is taught from many coaches. But the problem that I have with that is it used to be taught as a rule, like a rigid thing that you had to follow through palm out. When you did windshield wiper, you had to finish palm out. I remember going to coaching conferences and hearing experts say that if you don't finish palm out, your forehand is wrong, basically, and that the pros never do that. And it always used to bother me because I kind of finish just naturally a little more like Carlos on my forehand. Like if you watch the videos on Tennis Evolution or my YouTube channel, you'll see I finish a little more palm down. I don't get that extreme like pronation in my forearm. And I was always wondering, like maybe my forehand's deficient, like maybe I'm doing something wrong. And then so Carlos Alcaraz comes on the scene, one of the biggest, best forehands maybe of all time, right? And he follows through the way all those experts said is wrong. All of those expert coaches, like from a decade or two ago, said it has to be palm out. You have to pronate, and he doesn't pronate much at all. He obviously must pronate a little, and then he finishes basically, with the knuckles up, with the palm down, which I think is fascinating. You don't hear too many people talking about that particular aspect, but that's a very good comment, very interesting comment from one of the viewers here about his follow-through. I just think it's ironic that before he came on the scene, that used to be a very often diagnosed as an incorrect follow-through. You couldn't develop a top forehand like that. And obviously, it's not true. Or maybe he's the exception. Maybe he's doing it wrong, and he's just a genetic freak, and he can do it. But I think as long as you get a good whip and internal shoulder rotation through the windshield wiper movement, that you don't need, the way you finish is more stylistic, but obviously there's more than one way to do it. It's not the only way to pronate at the end with the palm out is not the only way to hit a forehand, even though I think it's a fine way to teach the forehand. Anyway, very interesting comment there. So what are the takeaways from Carlos's forehand? Look at the stance, look at the multi-dimensions of his stances. That's something easy you can take away. You might want to experiment with the lasso. See if you like it. I think this could be the future of the forehand. A lot of I'm experimenting with that with a lot of my students. I wouldn't say never do it. I would say experiment with it and see if you feel it helps you feel more loose and comfortable on your swing. If you feel it gives you a little more spin, if it helps you handle high balls, perhaps. I would say that swing should be combined with a fast racket speed, and you have to be very, very loose. One of the good things about that type of lasso that he does is it does help you learn to be very loose in your arm, to have an elasticity. So I would highly recommend if you're going to practice that, let that type of swing help you learn to be loose and elastic in your arm, and that will help you a lot. That's one of the keys to the modern forehand, modern strokes, is to be elastic and loose. And Carlos is very, very, I think we had a comment that he's very stretchy. He's extremely elastic and loose, which is awesome. Right, we have a great question. If you have the high elbow take back, should you consciously drop the elbow from the high position before initiating the forward phase? You should drop the racket is going to drop, and the elbow is going to definitely drop as the racket extends. So your elbow is going to extend, and you're going to drop the racket, and then you're going to pull it through with your legs and hips firing. But I like to think of that as more of a gravity drop. You don't have to physically place the racket down. Just let it fall with gravity. So if you have that high elbow position like Alcaraz does, where he takes it back with both arms. Personally, I don't think I would teach that to most people. A lot of people are copying that. A lot of people on social media copy that. That to me is his personal thing, and it actually puts the left arm in kind of a little awkward position, because then you have to separate, and the left arm has to go forward and get into a good balanced position. For many people, it's just easier to make a slightly less extreme coil and set up and just separate maybe a little earlier than he does. He separates like very late. So I think for most people, you definitely do not have to copy that. That's crazy. You see that taught a lot on YouTube and socials, and I don't think that's something you should naturally copy from Carlos. But just to answer your question, the elbow is high, like a Roddick or like a Alcaraz style. That elbow high start is fairly popular, like a Kyrgios. I also think that's not the best technique to copy, because there's more simpler ways to bring the racket back. I think maybe more compact ways even. It's not a bad way to swing, but just for most people, I don't know if that's the most ideal way to take the racket back the way he does it. And so it's unfortunate when this happens with every famous player. Every time we have a famous dynamic player on the pro tour, what happens? People copy. It's natural. It's human instinct. It's human nature. People copy it. Coaches start teaching it. And then the issue that I have as someone who studies technique and biomechanics is when people they justify teaching it because it's better, like it has an advantage biomechanically, like it's better scientifically, and that's where I get sort of the alarm bells start ringing for me, because you can say, well, Carlos Alcaraz does this and it's his unique style and we're going to try it, see if you like it. But when you say he does it and therefore you take the next logical step that it's scientifically better, it's biomechanically more optimal, that to me is a leap that I'm not, that troubles me, just as someone who studies sports science. I think that people make that false logical step many times, because you see many famous players do different things. They have unique stylistic elements that they bring to the table, and I think it's a mistake to just copy this, what's in vogue now, and then copy this and copy this. You need to look for the biomechanical universalities, the common biomechanical elements that are, that are evidence-based, that help you hit the ball better, that are not necessarily style. I'm not saying you can't try someone's style. You can definitely try different people's style and see if you like it, but don't argue that that's a better way, that's a better way scientifically because someone does it that way. Well, Alcaraz has a really good forehand and he brings it back like this, so therefore it has to be better for everybody. Or Alcaraz is doing the cobra serve, and therefore we know the cobra serves better than the traditional style of take-up. Or Alcaraz, we saw some stat that his average serve speed is 2 miles per hour faster with the cobra serve. So now we know the cobra serve is better than the traditional serve. Well, we don't know that. I mean, we don't. First, you got to question the stat. Then you got to say, well, this is just one example. And if you study any science, you know that one example does not make evidence. You know, it's just you need a broad sample of players doing some technique to prove anything. So the fact that it worked better for one player doesn't really mean a lot from a sports science point of view. Anyway, I just think you should be cautious when you see people claim, when you see something, a popular technique, and you see coaches and people on social media say, well, this is therefore better because so-and-so is doing it. That's not always the case. It could be something that they innovated. Like back in the 70s when Bjorn Borg was hitting his forehand a little differently, he was innovating and he was doing something biomechanically better than everybody else. So that if you copied Borg in the 70s or the 80s, if you copied Jimmy Arias's forehand in the 80s, if you copied Sergio Bruguera's forehand in the 80s or 90s, you were copying something that was someone's style, but that also happened to be a biomechanical innovation. But if you had copied Jimmy Connor's backhand, or Jimmy Connor's forehand, or Stefan Edberg's forehand, or you could give you all sorts of examples back in the day, you were copying something that was not a biomechanical innovation. It was something that actually was a legacy. If you copied Stefan Edberg's forehand in the 80s, you were copying a legacy style, a legacy technique. So just because someone is a famous player doesn't mean necessarily that they're innovating technique. They might just be doing something that feels good for them and they're an amazing player. Or sometimes you have a player like Borg or Arias or Sergio Bruguera. I talk about this in my new book, Winning Pretty. It's coming out this spring, a technique and biomechanics book. But yeah, but you would be copying an innovation. It just depends on whether it's a scientific innovation or not, a biomechanical innovation or not. All right, so do you think Alcaraz is copying Djokovic's serve? I don't know. I think someone on his team, I think he likes it. It feels comfortable. You have to be careful. Let's finish and we'll just touch on his serve. Been a very interesting technique talk. I'm enjoying this talk, guys. Thank you for sharing. So the serve, I don't know why he changed. I thought his serve was really clean. To be honest, as a technician, I thought his serve was really clean. It was very simple motion. It was a little bit classic. He came down and up, and he had a little pause in the power position, and I thought it was like super clean, to be honest. I was actually surprised that he changed it. To me, it actually looks a little more messy now. It's definitely a little more complicated to have that lag and the tip down. But if he likes it, obviously he won the Australian. He obviously, it must feel pretty good to him. Maybe it loosens up his wrist. The best thing I could say for that style is it gives you a nice, relaxed arm position and wrist position, which is cool. Some people claim it gives you more power. I'd be curious to ask. I don't have any inside information. Like I can't pick up the phone and call Carlitos and say, hey, do you feel like you have more power on that? Have you guys measured more power? Some people think that Cobra style with the lag gives you more power. I'm on the fence about that. If it's proven, like in a scientific study, to give you more power, because I'm not aware of any scientific studies that prove that. But we have one comment here that it is giving you more power. People say that. Yeah, people say it gives you more snap. I respect what you're saying, but I'm saying a scientific study that can prove that. I'll start teaching that to everyone. Probably right now, I let my players. We sort of try to find the right style for them in terms of how you take the racket up. Mark Kovacs talks about this all the time. Mark Kovacs is a leading sports scientist in tennis whom I know fairly well. I've been to a lot of his workshops, and I'm a certified coach in his organization, the International Tennis Performance Association. I'm a tennis serve specialist with Mark Kovacs, certified serve specialist, and he says, you know, players bring the racket up dozens of different ways, and that's not what makes a world-class serve. So from his perspective, he's always said that for a long time, and he's published research, real research on the serve, and he's always said, you know, players, if you study the great servers of all time, they bring the racket up lots of different ways, you know, and then there's a lot of commonalities after that. Once they get up into the power position, and if you watch how they load, and if you watch how they accelerate, you see a lot of commonalities. But he's always said that you look at the great servers of all time, and they all bring their racket up in different ways. Some bring the racket straight up, some have a lag, some bring their arms up together, some have the Cobra style, like we've been saying with Alcaraz. It's, you know, you see a lot of different ways to just think about it. You have to bring the everyone's got it's like shaking hands. People shake hands different ways. You have to bring that racket up over your shoulders, and you have to load. So people bring it up all different kinds of ways. Very interesting how people take it up. So it's fascinating to study, actually. All the different ways you can bring a racket up over your head to accelerate it, or to load up the energy and accelerate. There's a lot of different ways to bring the racket up. Think about how many different ways there are. Something that I've studied a lot, because I'm teaching it I'm trying to build I'm a primarily high performance junior coach. So I have to make those decisions, like how should I teach this to a young kid. I can tell you, takeaway for all you guys, it's a lot easier to learn the old Alcaraz serve than the new Alcaraz serve. If you're trying to copy, the old Alcaraz serve was really simple and clean, very clean, simple, very easy to learn. That's the way he did it. Is very much the model that I teach to a lot of my students, especially when they're learning. And then maybe we'll add something like the Cobra, or add a little lag to the serve, or, you know, like, but for me, like the way he used to do it was actually super clean and easy for people to learn. If you're trying to learn how to serve, the old Alcaraz serve is definitely an easier model to learn. So I'm not saying, you know, maybe if he gives him a little extra juice and he feels it, or maybe it's placebo effect. If you've studied placebo effect, if you've ever taken a sports psychology class, or sports science class where you learned about placebo effect, you know that sometimes we think that something's helping us, and it actually isn't. Like scientifically, it's not doing anything for us, but we're convinced that it is. And there's a lot of placebo effect on the pro tour with athletes who are trying things, and we should be careful. It's a very powerful psychological effect. We should be careful not confusing placebo effect with an actual biomechanical advantage. That's all I'll say about that. You know, there are many players that try something and they say, oh, this feels amazing. This is definitely helping me hit the ball better, harder, whatever, more spin. And then you measure it scientifically, and it's actually not more spin, or it's not more power, but the player's convinced it's helping them. And coaching tip, as a coach, sometimes you're better off letting them believe that. You're not telling them. You know, if they believe that that's helping them serve better, you should probably just say, you know what, it's helping you. Because that placebo effect is very powerful psychologically when a player believes it's helping them. And there's been a lot of scientific research on the placebo effect and how powerful it is and how misleading it can be actually sometimes. So this is a very well-established area of study in sports science, placebo effect. So anyway, guys, I think a very good talk. It's been a pleasure chatting with you. Good talk about technique. I love talking technique and biomechanics. Takeaway from Alcaraz serve. I'm not sure you should copy the Cobra. If you want, go ahead and have fun with that. But I would say the older Alcaraz version is much more easier to learn. He has an excellent serve. He loads very well. He explodes up into the air. You could work on that. He has very good leg drive up into the ball. He has very good posture. Like I would say, you know, I try to make this talk relevant for all of our subscribers and community members who watch the videos. I would say his posture is impeccable when he serves. If you notice how straight his body is, how tall he gets, has beautiful, beautiful posture when he serves. That's something that I would copy. See, most people dial into special things like the lag or the cobra. I look at his body posture, beautiful body posture, keeps his head up, gets a straight line from his lower body to his upper body, reaching up for the ball. That's something you guys could work on. Great leg drive, great posture. Those are sort of that's kind of where I'd start with the serve technique. You want takeaways that are real actionable and that are biomechanically real advantages, you know. All right, guys, I will see you on the next show. Thanks for tuning in. If you have any comments that you questions or comments that you wanted to add, just add them to the video comments after we sign off, and I will answer all the comments and questions personally. Thanks, guys. It's a pleasure, and I'll see you next week.